Welcome in, everyone. New episode of Modern Symposium. I'm excited for this one for sure. We kind of touched on this one a little bit back on Friday Fun Day episode, I believe, but that was towards the end of that one, and maybe the conversation wasn't of the highest quality that we were looking for. So, want to get back.
Little too fun.
Little too fun Friday. So, want to get back into it. Today, we're going to be focused on one question: is organized religion and has it been an overall good for humanity? It's a topic that's pretty near and dear to my heart. Just for a little background for everyone listening, me and Richie both went to the same Catholic high school for K through 8, so we're pretty familiar with the Catholic Church at least. So if most of what we talk about is about the Catholic Church, I guess I would apologize for not battering down on other religions as much. It's just kind of one of those things. It's the one you're most familiar with. So, got any opening thoughts?
No, I mean, if we were to, kind of look at it as far as a debate question, we've got the question of whether or not religion is good or bad for humanity. And I mean, it could be, that's a pretty general question. A lot of different religions, and defining what's good or bad for humanity could be kind of could mean different things to different people. So if we were to kind of define it and get a little bit more specific as far as what we're talking about, that way we're kind of on the same page.
Yeah.
What do you think as far as, I guess, first?
Yeah.
What do we mean good for humanity? What does that mean?
Okay, so if we want to start there, that one's even a little harder to define. But good for humanity, bringing about more equitable solutions for everyone. I would say, like raising standards of living, like progress. I would say that those are things that are good for humanity, even, like morality, things like that. Do you have any concrete definition you want to try and hammer down onto that one?
No, yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Like societal progress.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Anything that saves lives or helps people live longer, live more comfortably, or have better well-being, that type of thing.
Live more happily, right? Exactly.
Yep. Okay.
And then for the other definition we wanted to start with, it'd be like, what is a religion then, right? So I've brought up these two definitions probably in a past episode, but it's worth going over again before this one. The difference between deism and theism. Theism is probably what most people think of when they hear religion, and I think that's the one we're going to focus in on a little bit more today. A theism is an organized sect of religion, right? That's Catholicism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, right? It's any ideology, any like grouping of thoughts that are put into a uniform, like code of ethics, essentially. Deism, on the other hand, basically simply states that someone or something probably started everything, right? They look out in the cosmos and say, there's so much intricate detail, the laws seem to apply universally, there doesn't seem to be any breaking most of these laws that we find in nature. So they say it makes more sense that everything was created by someone or something rather than it essentially came ex nihilo, out of nothing, right? Deism says someone probably started it, but I don't claim to know the mind of God. I don't claim to know his name, who hung the stars in the sky. And, that's the main difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that deism is definitely makes a lot more sense when it comes to kind of scientifically trying to understand. It's being able to acknowledge that we don't know is a major step, I think, when it comes to trying to actually understand and come to a conclusion on a lot of these things. But I guess the question for today, though, would be more along the lines of religion, theism, throughout history and possibly even now in our current day. Has it been good, or has it been more good or more bad for humanity, society? And has it caused more harm than good or more good than harm? And I would say on my side, I think that it has caused more good than harm. Whereas I think it's a good thing that we established religions. Now, it depends on the religion, obviously. Some have been bad, some have been good. But I think overall, the idea of religion was a well-intended idea that had a lot of positive benefits on humanity, and that we might not be where we are today if it weren't for a widespread adoption and belief in religion.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's a kind of funny one that I'll start off with. Religion invented when the first con man met the first sucker, essentially. Now that's kind of a joke. I'll be taking the side of the argument that I think religion has done more harm overall than good. And I'll make my first contention here, I think. I'll say I believe more people have been killed in the name of God than for any other reason.
Well, I guess if I were to bring up the good thing, the reasons why I think it's good, I would narrow it down to two major ones. One is the social cohesion that it allowed for, whereas people were able to get together and trust one another and work in large groups because they all believed in the same God or gods. And that was a big evolutionary step. And then the other one is I think that it played a good role in helping develop the psychological components of children as they're coming up, and being able to kind of create a moral framework within their minds to guide their brain development into having a more ethical kind of persona, subconscious, habitual lifestyle.
Let me hop in there. This is really interesting one. I believe that religion gets its morality from us, not the other way around. And you brought up children, right? They've run tests. Children, before they can even talk, have a sense of morality in them, right? So they run tests. They'll have two puppets, right? And they'll have one puppet who's like super nice and speaks in really happy tones and is generally agreeable. Then they'll have the other puppet who's mean, who like, has like aggressive tones and aggressive actions. And without fail, nearly every single child, when given the option which doll they'd rather play with, they all choose the nice one. What does that show? It shows that before we can even be told that, God is watching and God wants you to follow these exact rules, we already have that baked into us. We already have some form of altruism, some form of, like morality embedded into our genes.
Yeah, I think that may be true, but now I'll give the example of if you were to take a scientific study and put two similarly aged children in a room and there's only one piece of candy, I'm sure some kids would offer it to the other one, but I bet there'd be just as much or more kids who say, no way, I'm taking it for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout their childhood, they'll experience situations that are more like that one, where yes, they'll probably choose to hang out with the more friendly and nice kid in their class rather than the mean one. But when it comes down to them becoming the friendly and nice person, they might not have the ability to foresee, hey, I shouldn't lie all the time or something like that, because if I continue to lie, then I'm going to develop a habit of lying. And then once I get older, it's going to be hard to break that habit because my neuroplasticity is not going to be as active as it is now. And so that'll become part of my subconscious personality, is that I'm just known for compulsive lying. And that will hurt me in the long run because I won't be able to form as many social bonds. I might feel isolated, depression, and have a rougher life. And they can't understand that. But one way to put it is, well, you shouldn't lie, because if you lie, you'll end up in hell. And if you don't lie and you tell the truth, that's a good way to end up in heaven, where hell and heaven, in that sense, are more just metaphors for a bad, miserable life and a good, prosperous one.
Yeah, like if you take some like holy text, right, and you basically change it and say, well, they're not really saying you're going to be eternally damned. They're not really saying you're going to have an eternal party in heaven. It's more of like a metaphor. It sounds nice, but I don't think you get to take religion a la carte, essentially, right? It's either the indelible, unalterable word of God, or it is not, right? And with so many instances, you can point to so many lines, and I have my Bible right over there. I can open up the textbook and find many examples of immorality. So I think what an interesting thing to do for us, one interesting thing for us to do would be to go through the 10 Commandments together, right? Now that's, like you said, it provides a moral framework for us, right? It's one of the things people always say, it's a good side of religion is, providing us a moral framework. So let's go through and let's see line by line which of these sounds moral to us. So the first one, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have other gods before me. Does that sound like a moral injunction of any kind to you?
I mean, that one specifically, no. And I think that is one of the problems with a lot of religions is that they are intolerant of other religions, which that could be the source of a lot of the wars. But we'll come back to the war thing because I've kind of a different take on that.
I have a lot on wars. We'll get to that one.
Get to that.
We'll get to that one for sure.
All right.
So that one, we both agree, no real moral injunction there. Number 2, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. That one seems pretty silly to me as well, right?
Well, so, I mean, a lot of it comes down to the interpretation, which is another thing we'll get to. But for that one, I actually think there is some moral grounds to it, because what it means is that you shouldn't pretend to be God, which I think is what ended up happening with a lot of the religions, which caused a lot of these wars and a lot of this bad side of it, was that we're no longer looking up to a higher power as the religions intended, and we are now looking up to someone who claimed to be able to interpret the laws of God in a way where he might have taken advantage or misrepresented them in a way that caused, suffering and oppression for their own personal gain, whether it was a person or an institution. So that one I think is actually a kind of a big deal as far as keeping the sanctity of the religion in line with what it was originally intended for, which is one that was often broken, and that's what caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, but if it's about keeping its integrity intact, you have to be pretty morally sound to start, and there's line after line of just horrible things in the Bible. So
I mean, as far as by our current standard, yes, but that's because it was written thousands of years ago. Now, obviously, it's not right, but it was their best. It was their best. It was their best guess, basically, at what was right, or it was their beliefs at the time on how to, live a moral, ethical, and prosperous life in a society. That comes down to the intention, which you mentioned earlier, that it was the first con man met the first sucker. Do you think that religion in general is more often created by con men for their own power? I would think it's often hijacked by con men for their own power, but I think at least I would guess that a lot of religions were constructed for fair and reasonable purposes, well-intended purposes.
Well, so that's a pretty interesting one. The origins of religion. I mean, we can't know for sure because most of the religions that have ever existed, we have no idea about, right?
They're intentionally obscured.
We find examples of very early on Neanderthals decorating graves. Why would you do that, right? You only do that for some sort of spiritual purpose for the most part, right? I think religion arises from our very early ancestors looking up at the stars, looking around at the earth and saying, what the hell, how did we get here? I think I've said this before.
To make sense out of things we don't understand.
Yeah. I think I've said this before on this podcast, but religion has stuck around forever because it was our first attempt at philosophy. It was our first attempt at ethics. It's our first attempt at morality, at government for the most part, right? It sticks around because it's been with us for so long.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And by that means, that's why I think, yes, obviously they're not perfect. And there are some, I mean, in all religions, I'm sure, or at least all of the big ones, there are some parts of it that are far outdated and that we've societally moved past. But for the most part, they all revolve around the golden rule, which I still think is applicable today, which is, treat others how you want to be treated. I mean, that is what Buddhism references. That's what Islam references. It's what Judaism references. It's what Christianity references. They're all in some way trying to form a guideline of how to live. I wouldn't even say necessarily morally, even though that's a huge part of it, but also to prosperously. Not only are you here to benefit others, but you're here to benefit yourself without harming others. And that takes hard work and that takes self-improvement. And that's also reflected in a lot of these religions. I think those are two very, very good things that should be taught to children in a way that they understand.
So I have two things. The golden rule is one of the closest we get to like a moral absolute. I don't think there's any moral absolutes. Even the golden rule falls apart in this case, which is masochists, right? If I'm
Right.
if I'm a masochist, I want harm done to me. Most people don't want harm done to them, right? So it
Yeah.
even
Or
fall,
like, even I mean it's not always the case.
like Jeffrey Dahmer, right? Whatever he wants done to him, you wouldn't want done to other people, right? So
I mean,
it's a very good one.
I used to live with my buddies, and I would get home from work, and I'd say, "Yeah, what's up, jackasses?" Like, someone grab me a beer. And if I walked in, now I live with my girlfriend. If I walked in and said, "Yeah, what's up, asshole? Why don't you go get me a beer?" It probably wouldn't go over as well.
So
So
it wouldn't be
maybe
as good.
yeah, right.
The
So
second one I wanted to bring up, you said, it was their best attempt at the time, right? In the society that they were living in, this was their best attempt, right? And I have to basically fundamentally disagree with that. And again, say it's the word of God or it isn't, right? It's either moral or it's not. So when we keep going through these 10 commandments, you know what God didn't feel like saying? Thou shalt not hold another person in bondage. In fact, he gives rules for slavery. He says Jewish people must treat their Jewish slaves better than their Gentile slaves. That's morally bankrupt to me, right? And saying, well, back in the day, like slavery was a thing, so we can't judge them on that. I say bullshit. I say we can judge them on that. But
I mean, well, we can, but we can't judge them under today's standards. Like you can judge the society and say, yeah, that is a worse society than we have now, but you can't judge the individual within the society because the individual is a product of societal norms. Whereas, I guarantee you 100 years from now, there might be different societal norms that
there will be.
People will look back on us and say, how terrible were those barbarians?
There will be. One that I firmly believe, I don't know how far in the future, but I do think this is going to be a thing, with scientific advancements for sure. Eating the flesh of animals is probably going to be seen as a pretty barbaric, archaic thing that, me and you take for granted. It's like, I'm just eating a cheeseburger, versus 100, 200 years from now, it's like, well, we have perfectly good lab grown meat. Why would we subject animals to, this basically form of, like chattel enslavement?
Yeah, I can see that too. And I do agree that, whether God is actually real in a sense or not, I think we can operate under the assumption that whether we can operate under a deist assumption where yes, there might be a creator, but we're going to assume that all of the religions we know of got it at least wrong in some aspects, and that they were made by humans. They were crafted by humans with, whether it was well intentioned or not, their interpretation of their attempt to try to explain a guideline for how to live properly.
And the question of the day is Catholicism correct, right? The question of the day is organized religion an overall good? So let's keep going down these commandments. Number 3 is thou shalt keep the Sabbath day holy. Now, on its surface, that one's not all that bad to me. A day off. That sounds pretty good to me, right? The only auxiliary to that would be if some days are holy, then that day means other days are profane in a sort, which, doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, what do you mean by that? I would say that is kind of representative of like, if you are working every other day, take some time to rest.
Yeah, no, I'd say like on its surface, that one's not the worst one. Number 4, thou shalt honor thy father and mother. It's okay, but not every father and mother should be honored.
But is not a good guideline to teach children that you should honor your father and mother for the most part. Like overall, if the question is overall, was it good? I'm sure there's a few bad fathers and mothers out there, but overall, that is probably, I'd say, a good one.
Yeah, no, it is. But yeah. Overall, you want children to learn from their elders, right? Now, that's basically how we've structured society. It's just like, I don't know. It's just the fact that like religion deals in absolutes. Like that's one of my main problems with it is there's no wiggle room. And, like a lot of theists will then, say, well, it has to be interpreted this way.
Right.
But when they say, oh, it has to be interpreted this way, you're kind of categorically like eliminating some of these things as true.
I agree. I agree with that because I do think, and the way I look at it a lot too, is that religion, even though I agree that this hasn't always been the case, it isn't really, a lot of people don't interpret it this way. I always think of it as, something it's like a set of guidelines that it should be up to the individual to interpret them in their own life. But I can see why it is that's not really the case very often because it's mostly, I mean, throughout history, it's been, there has been top-down authorities that claim to understand the interpretation and that anyone else who interpreted it differently was wrong. And I do think that is a major problem.
That's where the evil stems from. The evil stems from someone saying, hey, no, the word of God, he says this, and if you don't believe me, you're being thrown into hell. And typically they use it for their own gain.
Yes, so that brings me to my next point, which is so I've pointed out a couple things where I think we could agree on that religion has had some benefits. It's had, it has helped with social cohesion.
Social cohesion, for sure.
It has helped, develop moral frameworks. Look, it's not for everyone. Like you said, people are naturally ethical in a way, whereas it's part of evolution. We evolved to be able to get along with each other. In order to do that, we need to be able to, be friendly and nice and helpful for other people to form friendships and everything. So that makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't say, hey, if someone were to raise their kid without a religion, then that kid will necessarily be a bad person. I wouldn't say that at all. What I would say is that if no one in the world, all of a sudden everyone abandons religion and every single kid born today was raised without a religion, I do think we'd see more frequent cases of criminality and mental health problems than we would with, if religion was common. And so, I mean, there's a few things that I would argue has benefited society, has benefited humanity. You make a few points, whereas, well, religion has some downsides too, which have actually harmed people and caused a lot of oppression. Some of them I can see, but I think if you were to take religion out of it, is there a substitute for it? I would almost say it's necessary in a way. Some form of religion is necessary for societies to have such a large collaboration.
Yeah. In some aspect, religion is going to probably survive for as long as humanity survives. I don't really think there's much getting rid of it. I just think, over time, more people are going to move away from it, right? I believe it was Marx who described religion as the opiate of the masses, right? There's always going to be, that certain sect of people who essentially just want to be told what to do, right? Some people just don't really like thinking for themselves. It's part of human nature is that, we have a form of subservience built into us, along with altruism, morality. There is something that, part of you wants to just sit down, shut up, and be told what to do, right? How many times, in your friend group, say, just for an example, it's like, all right, everyone meets up, and then it's like, all right, well, what's the plan for tonight? And no one ever wants to, actually be the one to make the plan. Everyone just wants to be like, I'll go with the flow. I'm cool with whatever everyone else wants, right? That aspect of it, there's no getting away from that. So in that aspect, I would agree that religion's going to be around and it's going to be helpful for some people, right? Moving on to number 5.
Hang on. I do want to say something.
Yeah, hop in.
You brought up Marx, which I was actually going to say something along these lines as well. So Marx said that the religion is the opiate of the masses, right? Well, I'm assuming he's not a fan of religion based on that quote. What was his qualms with religion? I'm not too sure. I've heard that quote before. Didn't even realize it was Marx. Do you know what it was that he didn't like about religion?
Honestly, I really don't. But if I just extrapolate off that quote a little bit, it's probably just the fact that religion, is non-copacetic with free thinking, right? It's just the fact that here's the dictated set of rules, and if you don't abide by these, you're fucked essentially, right?
So Marx seemingly didn't like the idea that religion was a rigid set of rules dictated by a top-down authority that could be hijacked.
But communism's
and,
good.
But communism's good.
Yeah.
I mean, my underlying point being, what is the difference between Marxism and religion? Religion is a bunch of old books that had some ideas and some rules that could be implemented in a society, and then it eventually got taken over by a corrupt regime who used it to wield their own power. Marxism, a bunch of ideas and rules that were written by a man who then, after he died, was taken over by a corrupt regime to oppress their constituents and wield their own power. What is the difference?
I don't know, but it doesn't sound like you're making a very good case for religion there.
Well, I guess I'm making the case for religion because I think that
unless you're also making the case for communism.
No. The point being is that without religion, ideologies fill the gap. I feel like it's necessary, like you were saying, for human beings. We evolved to try to make sense out of things and to try to believe in some form of certainty or some form of ideals as a guide. And without a religion, I think the difference would be that religion is supposedly from a higher power, where these other ideologies are from a man or a government. But I mean, that without religion, that's why I don't think I don't think there is a way that human beings could live without some form of religion. And I don't think that Christianity is any worse than communism. And so if we get rid of Christianity and actual religions that revolve around some type of higher power, we're left with political ideologies.
But I think we could do like a humanistic form of religion, instead of a top down, like a bottom up approach. Like, here's what we think as people. I guess I'm just describing the earliest forms of religion, right? Here's what we think as people would be the best way for us to do things. Like maybe we just need a new religion, right?
You're right. And that's one thing about religion too, that as far as it goes, it's like absolutism. I agree. That's usually a bad thing, but it's kind of a good thing because you don't want it constantly change it. You don't want it to be like constantly updating. Whoever's in charge at the time can do whatever they want. Similar to the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, right.
You want it to be kind of written in stone a little bit, but you want it to be amendable. And the thing about religion that's probably a bad thing is that it's not amendable. And it is, but only through revolution. I mean, Judaism, Christianity, Islam all started from the same one. And then Christianity was then broken down into Catholicism and Lutheranism and all those. Right. And so like there are ways of changing it and reforming it, but it's not very easy. And so there is a problem there. But at the end of the day, I mean, I still think that the absolutism is not a good thing, but it also, like you said, some people want some type of absolutism. A lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea that I don't know what happens when I die. Well, like people, I don't know where the world came from. I don't know what's going to happen when I die. I don't know what to do. And so going to a religion, especially young children, I mean, the idea that when children learn that they're going to die, like when consciousness of your own mortality kicks in, that could cause a lot of like psychological trauma with kids. But if they're under the impression that, well, that this is just one life and I'll have an afterlife, and however I behave in this life will dictate how good my afterlife will be. For one, it's not as traumatizing to learn that you're going to die, and it also will probably incentivize you to form better habits while you're on this life. So, whether or not that is true, if there is an afterlife, doesn't really matter.
Let me hop in there. I would agree, it's a terrifying thought, death, right? It's a terrifying thing, especially for kids. A lot of philosophy revolves around the fact that you must accept that you will die. The only reason this life is worth a damn is because it ends, right?
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't think I would want my consciousness to survive for eternity. That kind of sounds like hell to me.
Yeah, agreed.
And like that, that will take a little bit for, kids to understand, right? But I don't think that necessarily telling them like, oh, like this life is just a warm up for the actual life that's to come, which is, how generations of the clergy has hoodwinked the population. They say, just work really hard, keep your nose down, be a good person. Your life might suck ass right now, but you have a better one, an eternal one coming. And that's
Well, on this one, wouldn't you say that if you do work hard, keep your nose down, be a good person, don't you think your life will be better? honor regardless of an afterlife. Just you were helping your future self by doing that.
Yeah, no, you definitely will. I just don't think that,
So it's good advice.
I don't think the ends justify the means, though. I think we can get away from the fact that I think I can tell you, keep your head down, work hard, you'll be rewarded. And I believe that knowledge is equally valid without saying, and if you do it, you'll get an extra life.
What about for like children or even adults who have, who might not have as much control over their impulses, or might have, as we're all flawed, obviously everyone's got their problems. I mean, I guess even so, I mean, let me revise the question. Yes, you could tell me that, and yes, I would agree with you that, if I work hard and that, then I'll get a good life. And you could probably tell a lot of kids that, and they'll probably listen, but then there will probably be some that won't. And if it's someone who's a stranger, like, how do I know, if I didn't know you, how do I know that you're not just some con man yourself who's just telling me to do that, and you're trying to hurt me? It seems like you're hurting me. Oh, you're telling me I have to go and work 8 hours, plowing a field every day for the rest, and then way down the line, things will be better? I don't believe you. I think you're just wanting me to plow your field. Why not put it in the form of a widespread adopted belief in a higher power? That way, to the perspective of, say, the children or whoever it is, it no longer comes from another man who is no more powerful than me. It comes from a higher being. That way, it's like, okay, it's more convincing.
That's hoodwinking the population, though, isn't it? That's the opiate of the masses. It's the great lie, right? And I don't think that it's morally justified to do, because especially when it's been used throughout history for whoever's giving you these moral implications, who is then benefiting off of it, right? Like accepting tithes, right? It's give 10% of your salary. God's actually really bad with money, apparently, it turns out, right? He needs more and more, right?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I agree with you on that, but my point on that is not that that's a problem with religion. That's a problem with human nature and power. I mean, absolute power corrupts absolutely. There is no difference between religion. I mean, look at what's going on now. Okay, we currently, religion is not at the forefront of our societal norms right now, where, we've got a separation of church and state, which I think is great. We shouldn't have a state religion that everyone has to abide by. I think that's a very, very good policy.
I mean, look at like Islamic countries in the Middle East, and
yeah, they're doing great over there, right?
And say that you want your government controlled by your clergy.
No, yeah, and I think that is a huge deal, actually, because all of the example you're talking about is about how people have suffered because of religion. I'd say they suffered because of corrupt governments, and at the time and place, there was no separation between church and state. So yeah, the governments were representing the religion, but that wasn't the religion that was saying we need to go invade this other country because they don't believe in the same religion we do. That was the government saying that. And so I think governments are the corrupting force.
No, I think the religion was corrupting the governments to do that. The Crusades.
Okay, all right. The Crusades, do you think that the Crusades were more likely that the person in charge of one country really didn't like the religion of the person in charge of the other country, and so they were? I mean, I wish that was the case. I wish that the governments were this passionate about their belief in God and their belief in religion, but it's not the case. These are the hijacking forces that we're talking about. The government took over, started using religion as propaganda, the same way they do patriotism now. And then they used it to rise up the masses and get them to go to war. What was the war over? Not religion. It was over territory and resources, and the same things that all wars have been over forever.
Yeah, well, the Crusades were about Christendom trying to take back the Holy Land from the Muslims.
Okay, let's look right now. Palestine versus Israel. This is kind of a religious war. But is it really? I mean, do you think Netanyahu is fighting because of Judaism, or do you think he's fighting because he wants the territory? So it's not. I don't think it's religion that's causing the wars. I think the religion
but he's using the religion, and that's
he's using religion as Yes, agreed. But it's not it's not that the religion is bad. It's that the government is bad or the people in power are. It's the same thing as patriotism. I don't think patriotism is bad. I think we should love America. We should care about the um you know Constitution and the principles that American you know culture represents. But we shouldn't just blindly do what the president says because we believe in America. That's what America is all about, is not just blindly believing the president. But I mean, in the same way with religion, I would say that, and I'll put it this way. Okay, fine. You're saying that we would be better without religion. Okay, take religion out. Take religion out. The war still happened, but they just, instead of using God, they used they used ideology. I mean, there was so many wars that if World War II was all about conflicting ideologies.
World War II was a religious war as well.
How so?
Well, the Catholic Church, signed a concordat with Adolf Hitler. They celebrated his birthday from the pulpit up until the year 1945 for some reason. The Japanese population believed that their emperor was a literal god. Same thing in Italy with Mussolini. Mussolini and the Catholic Church were essentially one and the same. World War II was fascist, authoritarian, religious groups against basically the rest of the world, essentially. It was the rise of fascism for sure, but authoritarianism through religious means.
I don't see that might be the case, but it's still the same thing, because there's also, okay, look at Stalinism. I don't know if there was a religious aspect to that. I'm sure there was, but the ideological aspect was communism. I mean, Stalin was worshipped as a god, kind of. That's what happens when there is no religion. And I wouldn't say that that's any better. I think it's better that there is some, I'd say religion by definition of believing in a idea without any evidence, but it's supposed to be somewhat of a guide on what's right and wrong. I don't think that is avoidable in any sense. I think that's just, we evolved to think that way. I don't think there's any way to avoid it, but I think the difference is, if we don't have a religion, then that hole is filled by some type of ideology. And now I think the ideology might be, like you talked about, why can't we make a humanist religion? Well, we tried. Nazism was supposed to be a humanist religion. Communism was supposed to be a humanist religion. And all of these led to the slaughter of millions of people. We can't, we've tried, we can't. They always lead to powerful people corrupting the idea. And so I don't think that's a problem with religion. I don't think it's religion that caused all the oppression, religion that caused the suffering. I think it's the corrupt people who used it as a tool to manipulate the people who weren't able to think critically.
So shouldn't that be a tool we should get rid of then?
But I don't think you can, I guess is what I'm saying, is because if you get rid of religion, then you have patriotism and ideology. Should we get rid of those too?
Well, ideology, that's something that's just an idea set.
Patriotism, but is religion not an idea?
Religion is an idea.
Religion and what's the difference? I think they're fundamentally the same thing.
They're the same thing. So you can't get rid of ideology is what I'm saying, because anytime someone has, I think we should do things that way, that's an ideology, right? So that's not going in here. Patriotism, I don't know if we should just love America, to be honest.
Maybe not unconditionally. I would agree.
Because there's many, many things that we can change, right? And, I think it's good to, stand up for civil liberties, and parts of, our Constitution, right? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, right? I think that's a good thing to stand up for. But, patriotism, especially in the last, say, 70 years since World War II, being patriotic is do you support the toppling of democratic countries in South America and Africa, right? For us to go in there and basically install an authoritarian leader who will just give us their natural resources for the cheap. That's not something to be patriotic over, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I'd say that the same idea applies to religion and patriotism, which is that blind allegiance is never a good thing when it's by a bunch of people. So, if everyone believes in patriotism could be a good thing. Patriotism is what helped us to build up a very prosperous country and invent a bunch of cool shit and do a bunch of cool stuff. And it's also the same thing that had us, invading countries and stealing their resources and oppressing their civilians. Blind allegiance is not recommended in any form, whether it's religion or patriotism.
And that blind allegiance, that's the cornerstone of religion, Richie. You must blindly follow every single part of this.
Right, yes. And it's the problem, and also because we really don't know. We don't know why we're here, who created us. And so it's a guess at the solution of a problem that we actually don't know. And to say that, like, yes, we do know, that is not good. As a society, that's not good. That's the part that I would agree with. We shouldn't just blindly say, okay, well, the Bible says that we should throw, whatever you mentioned earlier, that, we should have slaves or whatever that type of stuff is. But if we acknowledge it as it is, which is that this was a guess at a guide on how to live a prosperous and fulfilling and ethical life, and it's the best guess they had at the time, and it's now outdated, does that mean that religion and that we wouldn't have been better off with it? That's what I'm getting to.
Okay.
Is that it's still a good thing that we had it, though. It's still, even though it had some downsides, it's still a good thing that we had it, because without it, I don't think we would have gotten to the point we are.
So here's an interesting one. These 10 commandments, these were supposedly given to Moses at Mount Sinai, right? And they have these list of rules. Half of them you don't get to Mount Sinai without believing in these things already, right? So here comes 5, 6, and 5, 6, 5, 7, 8 are all pretty good ones in my book. Thou shalt not kill, pretty straight up, right? You can't really make an argument against that one. Thou shalt not steal. Once again, pretty good. No one's gonna be that mad. This one, probably the best one. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. That one has the most nuance to it, right? Right? Like
that's just like you shouldn't. What does that one mean exactly? Like you shouldn't.
That one gets simplified as don't lie, right? Like bearing false witness against your neighbor is like, I saw Richie go into Farmer Joe's field and steal 3 sheep, right? So that one I think is the most complex, the most nuanced one that you'll give them props for. These other ones, you don't get to Mount Sinai if your group who's been wandering the desert for 40 years, we're killing each other. We're stealing from each other, right?
Yeah, but was it meant for the people who were at Mount Sinai, or was it meant for their children and their children and their children?
Yeah, that's a good point. It just seems like, I mean, I was going to say it seems self-evident, but, again, when you're trying to create a moral framework, you still got to include the big ones, right? Let's go to number 6. I want to hear your opinions on this one. Thou shalt not commit adultery. How do you feel about that one?
By adultery, it means, cheating on your spouse, basically?
Yeah.
I think that's a good one. I mean, I don't see a downside in that one.
Well, so that stems from,
I think it's a good one to live by, I would say. I mean, the reason being is to raise healthy children with a mother and father that are loyal to each other, and then can provide a good framework to them.
Yeah, no, like that side of it obviously makes sense. Just decide that, like, I don't really think that having sex with someone else, is like a morally corrupt thing to do, in my opinion.
I mean, I guess and maybe in some cultures where it's like monogamy, or not the opposite of monogamy. Polygamy.
And that one's like the center of monogamy, which monogamy versus polygamy is, like an interesting one to talk about. Because,
that's a good debate too.
Because human beings we're both. We have monogamistic tendencies and we have polygamistic tendencies. That being said, I might actually have to lean back to that one being a pretty good rule, because throughout history, any polygamous societies, those tend to be even somehow worse for women overall than monogamous societies.
I could be wrong on this. I kind of remember reading about how polygamy was more common in hunter-gatherer societies, but when we settled down and after the agricultural revolution, that's when monogamy became more beneficial because of that reason, where it's something about like mating patterns where the men end up like a small amount of men end up with like a disproportionate amount of the women, whereas then the children aren't even it leads to inequality because the kids don't have a father figure really,
Hmm.
because women are on their own raising the kids. And it also, I mean, it has a lot to do with a lot of stuff when it comes to like
But then
evolutionary tendencies.
that one's also interesting. In those cultures, you're not raised by a mom and dad. You're raised, by the community. You're raised by like 12 moms, right? Which is a pretty good structure itself. You don't need one mom, one dad. You just need some sort of support system, essentially. But,
Yeah, you don't need it, but I think it psychologically benefits the kid to have one mom, one dad, or at least a figure, like, whether it's his actual biological dad or not, someone to look up to as a father figure that is trustworthy. I think that's a big part of it too, is that we're wired to biologically care for our children. Like we care about our children more than we care about ourselves. And so it's like, okay, if you could trust your kid with a bunch of other people in the community, but they don't care about your kid as much as you do. So they won't be willing to favor him over any of the other kids in the community. And so that could, what I mean, that there could be an upside to having it being your biological mother and father who raised you. So that way, that these are the two people that you could trust the most in the world because they're wired to want more they care more about you than they do about themselves or that you do about yourself, because that's how our brains are wired. That's a good reference to Richard Dawkins' book about the selfish gene. We care more about our genes than we do about ourselves.
yeah. And then here's these last two get grouped together a lot. So I'm going to group them together. This one I do not agree with. I'll hear you have to say. Then I'll maybe give you a gotcha question on it. Haha.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, thy neighbor's house, nor his farm, nor his cattle, nor anything that is his.
Does that just take, you can't take your neighbor's stuff, including his wife?
No, no, so that's stealing, which is a different one. This one says you cannot covet, right? You
What is
cannot.
covet? Yeah, what does covet
Covet
mean?
is like want, like be jealous of in a certain
Ah,
sense.
okay. So it's a you shouldn't be envious.
Yes.
I think that is a good one, although I don't think people have as much control over that one. I don't think people have as much free will over whether or not they want or feel like they want something.
Well, and now here's what I'll say about it. It's a good thing that you are envious of, all right, so,
I don't know if I agree with that
well,
though.
no,
Envy is one of the
you
seven deadly
will,
sins, isn't
you
it?
will. So jealousy is the foundation of unhappiness, right?
Hmm.
So if you're like super hyper fixated on like, oh my God, like he has a nicer car than me, he has a nicer house than me, he has a hotter wife than me, that can lead you to being unhappy, right? So
Hmm.
in that sense, this one's decent. But the fact that that's like our driving force essentially is like wanting to better oneself. Like this
Right.
is the foundation of essentially like capitalism, greed, right? Like I want to have a nicer house. I want to have a better car. I want to have more for myself. Like coveting other people's shit when you like see he has a pretty nice setup, that drives you to go out and, do something to become more of yourself, in my opinion. That's like our foundational aspect of, how civilization has come around, essentially.
That is good. I mean, there's definitely something there, but I mean, you made two seemingly contradictory points, which I'm also
I
thinking
did.
about.
I
I
did, yeah.
agree with both of them,
Yeah.
and they also contradict each other, which is that
Yes.
jealousy and envy, comparison is the thief of joy, and jealousy
That's
and
that's
envy
that's that's what I was
are
going for,
are
right?
to are going to lead to an unhappy life for sure. But also for sure is that without some form of is there a difference between envy and the competitive nature in human beings that drives them to be better? And I can't pinpoint it. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. I don't know. They seem contradictory.
I think they're basically one and the same. It's just like the degree of it, right? So like jealousy and envy is like at the very top of like oh my God, like I like really want that. I really need that versus just like, your drive for resources, for, goods, for happiness, having a better life. I think that's like more like, I think it's like this, they're like the same thing. It's just like a sliding scale sort of deal.
Yeah, I could see maybe if, envy meaning, like you said, that person right there, I want to be better than him, or I want to have the thing he has, versus the competitive nature being more along the lines of like, I want to be the best version of myself that I can be. Rather than comparing myself with someone else, I'm comparing myself with me yesterday, or with what I could have been if I, that type of idea. Although I do think, I mean, there's definitely a lot of overlap for sure. So that is a good one.
Yeah, no, that is a pretty good one. I
Is that
had,
all of them? Or there's
yeah,
another one?
that's all 10 of them.
So it sounds like we hit like 7 or 8 for 10 out of good ones versus bad. I think there
Let's
was like 5 or 6 for sure good ones. There was a couple that were iffy, and then there was like 1 or 2 that were probably bad.
Yeah, there's at least like 5 solid ones. Thou shalt not kill, very solid. Thou shalt not steal, very solid. Bear false witness, very solid. And then I would say like all 3 of those I would agree with. You can have those as like pillars of morality. And then the next 3 to 4 were kind of like, maybe. And then the last 3 kind of have like nothing to do with morality in my book. But
Yeah.
again, I got to go back to the point of, if I'm making a top 10 of most important things, I'm not making 1 through 3 all ways to worship God, right?
Yeah. No, I see your point on that one. So when it comes to religion in general, so, all right, I've already made my point about how I think a lot of secular ideas follow the same exact pattern as religion. But if we were to define religion as something that involves a God or a higher power, and something that has an ethical framework, well, I guess, I mean, there's some religion, like back in the day, I don't believe there was much of an ethical component to it, as far as like the old gods, like the Greek gods, Roman gods, where I don't know, there might have been, but I don't know. Do you know? I don't think there was anything about like,
Well, no,
God says you should do this or do this. I think it was more so like the
well, so
gods
those,
would just, they were kind of, the gods
they
were
were
kind of like,
human.
they were kind of like flawed themselves, right? They're
Yeah,
like hedonists themselves.
I mean, Zeus was going around like raping like
Hmm.
everyone, so like those stories are like, were, very similar, that parables that are meant to, give insight into like the human condition, essentially, right? And,
Right.
the Greek and Roman gods, they were basically human themselves, right? And that's where you can see how man creates God, not the other way around, right? You like see like we put in aspects of ourselves into these myths, essentially, right? And
Yes. But that's okay. Yes, that's exactly what I mean. If that is the case, which we can have the debate whether it is or not on a different one, I do think it is the case though. Then what that is, I still think that it's better that we do that, because that is what we do with everything that we don't understand. Like that's what we do. The reason why there's less widespread belief in God now than there was a long time ago, is not because there's less morality necessarily, and it's not because there's more morality necessarily. It's because we know more for sure. We've figured, and I shouldn't say for sure because it's not, but we shouldn't. We have better systems. I
we're
think the
we're
only
pretty
difference.
we're pretty sure we have a better understanding of how like the cosmos work now
Right.
than our hunter-gatherer predecessors.
Yes, and due to that, I would say the only thing better than religion would be actual science. Now, I'm not talking about like nonsense science. I'm talking about scientific method, and that's what's probably led to a lot of the growth that we've seen over the past couple 100 years. Is not religion necessarily, but science. But I still think that prior to science, religion was good, and I still think it does have a good role, because science can tell us, why a day is 24 hours, but it can't tell us, what to do in a situation where we find ourselves at a fork in the road and don't know whether to do this thing that will help us or this thing that will not help us, but is probably more ethical.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's having moral frameworks is like obviously a good thing. It's it's really the problem with religion that, we've said this a few times already, but it's just the fact that religion is taken over by authoritarian figures who then use it against people, essentially, right? They get them here's a good one. Evil people will do evil no matter what they're taught, basically, right? If you want to get a moral person to act immorally, that's where religion comes in. The genital mutilation community is entirely religious. The suicide bombing community is basically entirely religious.
What's the genital mutilation community? The
Well,
transgender doctors?
Have you looked at the tip of your penis?
Oh, that, yes. Well, yeah, and that's good. And that's, I don't know if I would say it's definitely immoral, but it's definitely weird. I mean, but
genital mutilation of newborn babies? See, that doesn't sound
a weird one.
That doesn't.
I mean, it is a little bit. I guess they took it without my permission, but I mean, if they were under the guise that this is healthy in some way, then fair enough. I don't think they meant me any harm.
Well, do you know why that came about?
No, I don't actually.
That is the covenant between God and Abraham. God says to Abraham, "You are my favorite homie. You are the most loved person on earth. I will give you more descendants than there are stars in the sky. And in order for me to tell who are your descendants, you're going to cut off the tip of all of your descendants' penises. So that way I can know who's moral, who's going to get into heaven and who won't." That's the covenant that God makes with Abraham.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that one I know I can't really can't really find a way off the top of my head why that's very important for a cohesive society, but I don't know. But I mean, but it is things like that. But I would also, I mean, my point still holds, I think, which is, yes, like most religions, especially the older ones, have like weird shit like that, or a lot of them have like things about like homosexuals, about how like homosexuality is a sin, that type of shit that we don't believe anymore.
That's on my list that was going to get brought up for sure.
Yeah. And yes, and I agree that they're flawed, but we both went to a Catholic school. We didn't learn about cutting off the penises of babies and how homosexuality was a sin and all of these about slavery and all that. We learned, here are some good ethical frameworks, and what happens if you follow these is you go to heaven. What happens if you don't is you go to hell. That's pretty much the summary of what I remember learning in church and religion classes. Now, I think that or something like that is good. Now, what the moral framework is, it could be different. There might be better religions out there that I would agree with more, where I actually think this is more important than this. Fine. But the idea of having that and having the idea that like this is the idea of the afterlife is not like this is important right now. It's that this is your life's purpose, is to be like this. And I think that's an overall good thing to train kids. As far as the bad things go, I would say the same goes. So we've got three options here when it comes to how to figure out what's going on in the world. You've got religion, ideology, and science. I think science is probably the best one, but I think all three of them are still vulnerable to being hijacked by a corrupt entity who then uses it to wield their own power. They all have been just the same. So I don't think we can attribute religion as the cause of wars, because we've had wars over science and we've had wars over ideology. Like every bad thing you can attribute to religion throughout history can also be attributed to science and ideology. I challenge you to find one that can't be.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying there. When you're saying that, I was just thinking about how terrifying it'd be for someone to essentially hijack science, essentially, right? And it's like, all right.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, like, all right, like, we know this to be a fact, right? Like, we know that, say, the sun revolves around the earth, right? Which is what religion told us for hundreds and thousands of years or whatever. It's absolutism, I think, is probably the core of what the problem is.
Right. And what it is it's people's human nature. It's their natural willingness to believe someone who claims to know absolutes. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Because that can be wielded for power regardless. I mean, when you talk about, how scary it is to have people hijack the science, I can list you 5 examples in the time that I've been, maybe not 5, but at least a couple off the top of my head, where the science has been hijacked. Like you said, here's what we know, that the earth revolves around the sun. Okay. Here's what we don't know, that human beings are causing climate change. We don't know that. Scientific studies have said climate change correlates with human society's carbon emissions. We don't know that for sure. Science doesn't know it for sure. Any scientist will not tell you, yeah, I know for sure that humans are causing climate change and this is what we need to do to stop it. They will all say the data patterns are consistent, that it seems to likely be the case. But we don't know that. Yet,
Right.
I guarantee you that gets wielded for power. It has been for a while. It's going to keep being wielded for political power. I guarantee it. The
And
vaccine case was another one with Fauci saying all these things that the science wasn't backing that, but he claimed to be the science. He would say, trust the science. By saying trust the science, he meant trust me. Other scientists were contradicting him. The whole idea of trusting the science is not a thing. Science is about we
not
don't do things in
is
absolutes.
essentially not trusting the science. Science is
Yes,
all about like prove to me that this isn't the case, right? Like you form your hypothesis and then you collect data, and if that data supports your hypothesis, you don't say I'm correct. Like
mm-hmm.
I'm absolutely fundamentally this cannot be. You just say like I wasn't able to disprove it yet.
Exactly. And that's what makes science, I think, out of those three, science is the best. I think when it comes to like a state, when it comes to government, like should the government be using religion and demanding that its constituents follow their religion? Absolutely not. Is it a good thing to maybe raise your child religiously? I think it could be, but I do think that's up to the individual. I wouldn't be mad at you if you didn't, but the
Mm-hmm.
government shouldn't be doing that. The government should be working with science, but science is also hijacked and it also causes wars. Mark Andreessen, he was the founder of Netscape. He has a podcast now, a big tech venture capitalist. He was just talking about how he went to the Capitol, or he went to the Pentagon or something like that. They were doing some type of conference, and they kind of let it slip to him. They said, yeah, well, all of the science experiments, the quantum physics experiments that were done that we have not declassified yet. So it's like, and he was like, wait, what? Like, yeah, there's a lot of physics experiments that were done and things that were derived and a lot of things that are known that the CIA immediately jumped on and classified, and now they're holding it so that no one else can see it. And so
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
hijack the science,
Let me hop in there. Hijacking the science. I read a report. I don't know if it's a report or if it's just like some random dude hearing his buddy talking about it. Right? Doesn't really matter. It's just the idea that counts. Let me hop in there on myself. Here's the difference between Socrates and Jesus. Socrates, he might not have been a real person. We don't know if Socrates was real. We're pretty sure he existed, right? Because there's multiple accounts of him from different texts, something that isn't a case in the case of Jesus. But here's what's important. The words of Socrates, if he didn't exist, it doesn't matter, right? If it was just Plato all along, you can read these words, and what he is saying, it still holds value. If Jesus did not exist, if these were the ideas of other people, it all fundamentally crumbles, right? You can't say that like these still hold water if Jesus did not actually die for your sins, right?
I
But
suppose, yeah. I
but
can see what you're saying.
but now going in on hijacking the science, I saw like a TikTok or something probably. They said AI will essentially be hoarded by the government. They're gonna take like maybe like a top of like the couple of competitors, and they're gonna give them like unlimited funds, and then they're gonna make that like not publicly accessible because they want to hijack it for themselves. Essentially, they're the only ones who are gonna want to have this superpower essentially, and that's
Yeah.
a pretty terrifying thought. If they hijack, like the smartest entity that we know of, and they keep it totally for themselves, that's pretty authoritarian, terrifying result in my book.
Yeah, no, I read some stuff about that too. How like they were looking at how the surveillance state was in communist in the Soviet Union, and the fundamental flaw in the system they had was simply that they didn't. Basically, it's kind of I think it was on The Simpsons. It's an old joke where like, oh yeah, the FBI is spying on you. That means however many people there are in the society, there must be that many FBI agents so that they can all, everyone's tracking one person. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what it was in the Soviet Union, was that it's like, okay, they would spy on you, but they couldn't follow you everywhere. They couldn't get everywhere. Whereas now, if an authoritarian regime a tyrannical regime were to come to power, they totally could. And
Right.
so if they were to go about the same exact thing as the Soviet Union did, then we would all be screwed because they would actually succeed this time because they have the power to do it. And AI is the same exact, it goes right along with it, where not only can they spy on you, but they can also control. I mean, if the government controls AI, then the government decides the truth.
Yeah.
That would be like the
Right.
government controlling the internet.
Right.
And they do in some countries, but that very bad, very bad.
How far away do you think we are from like a surveillance state?
I think we've been there for years.
Yeah,
I mean,
probably.
it's not that I think that there's a CIA agent sitting there watching us right now, but I think that they could definitely pull up.
If you
Apple's
do,
got all our text, they can pull up our text. They can pull up everything I've looked up on you
if
on
you do
every.
become a subject of interest, they have everything on you.
Yeah, oh, I mean Alexa's listening or Siri,
Right.
they're listening. Like they can. They've got that. You have devices all surrounding you at all times that can be basically tuned into at any time. It seems
Yeah.
like.
One thing I wanted to bring up earlier, it's kind of an underlying philosophical question behind religion, like in its totality. What do you think about moral relativism versus moral absolutism?
I guess in layman's terms.
Okay. In layman's terms, moral relativism, well, let's start with absolutism. Moral absolutism is saying you can like identify one thing and this holds true like basically always. Thou shalt not kill, right?
Yeah.
Like that one's pretty damn good. The golden rule, pretty damn good, right? And like almost all cases it's going to hold up, right? Do you believe that morals are relative, right? They change from case to case, or do you think they're absolute?
I think relative. I would say more. I would. Yeah, I think pretty much relative because I mean anything that I could say is a moral choice, I can see a situation in which it would be immoral. At least when you're talking about
Right.
actual actions. I think maybe when it comes to like intentions, I would say could be morally absolute. If I intend to harm you, that's probably bad no matter the situation.
Well, all right.
But
How about this? How about so thou shalt not kill? Like you just said, like doing harm to someone, right? We just said basically like that's a really good one, right? You should have that as a law of society. I agree, right? However, in relative cases, like all right, if some guy has his finger over the button to drop a nuke on a country, is it moral to kill him? Maybe.
no, or yes, I would say yeah, I would agree. I'd say then it is, and I would
Right.
say that because my intention is not to harm you,
Because
it's
your
to save all the other
intention is
people.
to save, and I like what you said about intention for sure. Like that goes a long way for sure.
I think you can probably do things that are unintentionally immoral without them necessarily like I mean that's okay. That's an even better question.
This
Is naivety immoral? If you're doing
no,
something, I'd say it is in some cases because I mean it's not. It's a tough one because
right? It's
if you're
hard.
doing
Yeah,
something because you don't know any better, but it's harming people,
you're
I
still
mean,
harming people.
you're
You
still
didn't
harming
you
people,
didn't know, right?
and it really depends. I mean, I think it really depends on like
Our
your
our
ability to
laws,
know.
our laws in the United States of America state that that's not a valid defense. You can't say
Right,
I didn't know that that was a law, so I wasn't intentionally breaking the law. You still have to follow the law, even if you didn't know it was a thing.
right, and well, what about even? I guess like if it makes sense that you wouldn't know, then fine. But what about naivety in the sense of like trying to think of a good example, like someone who I mean, trying to think of a good one. So say you're at work and you're supposed to read you're working on a construction site and you're supposed to go through the safety training, but you didn't actually go through it. You just skipped through all the stuff. You didn't care. And so you didn't learn that if you were to do this, it's going to screw everything up. And then you do it and someone gets hurt. You didn't intentionally hurt them, but you were intentionally naive. You had the
Mhm.
ability to take the, take the initiative and be responsible and be competent and your voluntary incompetence is what ended up hurting someone else. I would almost say
Right.
that's more immoral than if it was just you know
No,
something in a different situation, I guess. But
no, I totally get what you're saying there. And so right there, you're once again saying moral relativism, right? Like,
Mhm.
all right, so you naively didn't read the procedure and you purposely didn't read the procedure. Someone got hurt because of it. That's a bad thing. However, maybe naivety isn't an excuse like ever. I don't know. Like Can you think of one where naivety would be morally not wrong?
I mean, like, there, if it's like a kid who probably didn't know what a gun was, and there shouldn't have been a gun around him anyway, and he
Okay.
accidentally,
Yeah, yeah.
but I would say then the greater point would be then, is competence moral? Like, fundamentally, like, is someone who is more competent assuming that his intentions are also good, is he fundamentally more ethical and more moral than someone whose intentions are the same but they're less competent?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's like we're working under the parameters of, you're doing good. So like the competent person is trying to do good, right? So they're able to do more good, essentially, versus an incompetent person who's still trying to do good, but since they're incompetent, maybe they fuck something up along the way and it causes harm to someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, under those parameters, I'd say then, yeah, like morality is almost just competence to a certain
So,
extent.
do we have a moral obligation to maximize our own competence? Say, that a parent who has kids, and, they're normally competent, but they drink or something, or they're under the influence in some way, and something bad happens to their kids because they weren't watching. It's like, obviously that wasn't their intention at all, but but they intended to. I mean, I feel like people would still be like, oh, like, how could you be an idiot and get drunk while you were supposed to be watching your kid? Like, there would still be
Mm-hmm.
some type of like shame there, even though it was not their intention at all. It was an accident,
Right.
and it could happen to anyone. But it's a competence thing. I feel like that's a big deal, which goes along with, bring it back to the point. That goes along with some of the rules about religion. Yes, religion was used to exploit people and make them work hard, but part of that was like, yeah, you should work hard because you need to be competent in order to provide for others. You know, someone who has no ability to, someone could be the nicest person in the world, the most altruistic person in the world, but they have no ability to provide. And so, would you say
But
that?
but being like totally incompetent, I don't think that makes you a morally bad person.
No, I don't think so either. But I think
Right.
it's hard to. I think it would be hard for someone who is it'd be hard to make an altruistic argument as to why you shouldn't work hard, I think. And by work hard, I mean improve your own abilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. Going back to relativism versus absolutism, the problem then with moral relativism is that we don't have any, like, we can basically never get any set of concrete rules, right? And that's where you get into moral gray areas, right? I would say most people would actually think that morals are pretty like absolute, right? That there's some form of, right, like higher organization. There's some form of, like almost like ethereal, like form of goodness, right? And that certain actions, certain responsibilities fall into that and certain ones like don't. And, I totally get that, right? Like you want people acting the right way and you want people to believe that, there's always the right thing that you can do. It's just, I don't really know if I believe that. And that one's hard. That one's like, we can't nail this one down. There's no right answer here.
Yeah, no, I mean I agree 100% too. That there is definitely no. I don't think there is I don't think I could say anything that is absolute. That's always the right thing to do. There are like really close guesses. That like we do the best we can. Same with like the way we can't know for sure that that whatever we don't know for sure that gravity works exactly according to the numbers. That's something that, like, as a contrast against religion, science is amendable. So Newton's laws were a thing for a couple hundred years, and then they started examining the quantum realm
Right.
and realized they don't apply.
Newton's
You
laws
know,
work up to a point.
right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
up to a point. So like Newton was damn close, and he thought he had the algorithm for the universe, but he forgot about the things that were so small that we had no chance of ever even knowing they existed at the time. He missed it on that one. And I think that's the same thing when it comes to ethics, where it's like we can make a rule and it's very damn close, but I guarantee that there's some situation out there that none of us have ever seen before, but it's there where it might not be the right ethical thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen those memes? It's like, it'll be like, I don't know, like some guy like walking away, like looking all cool or whatever. But it's like Newton, when he said that an object will not move if you don't move it. It's like, that one's a banger for sure.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
But all right.
Yeah, I mean, no, nothing really. I think it was a good conversation.
Yeah, no, I think it's coming to an end here. I have a whole slew of indecent things that the Catholic Church has done over the years, if you want to hear them.
Yeah, might as well rattle them off.
All right.
Close it out.
So this was a list of concessions that Pope John Paul made II in the year 2000. He apologized for the Crusades, the Inquisition, the persecution of the Jewish people on account of deicide meaning the murder of a god. They held Jewish people as a whole responsible for murdering Jesus. Anti-Semitism being the official doctrine of the Catholic Church until 1964. Injustice towards women, which is half the human race. The forced conversions of indigenous peoples in South America. This was preceded by a whole list of other concessions that the Catholic Church had made before that. Their part in the African slave trade, the admission that Galileo was right in regards to the movement of heavenly bodies. That one came out in 1992, so better late than never on that one. Legalized violence and torture in the Counter-Reformation. The sack of Constantinople and Byzantine Christianity. The murder and conversion of Serbians in the Balkans during World War II. And some 90 other concessions that I did not list.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But that just goes to show. Now, that's like saying, same thing as if, when you look at, say, the Nazis, right? If you think that because of what the Nazis did, does that mean that the German government has always been bad and will always be bad? I think that means that the German government was hijacked by some bad guys who turned it into that,
In part, the Catholic Church, because here's something the Catholic Church has never apologized for. The Concordat signed between the papacy and the Third Reich, the first treaty Hitler ever signed, gave the Church a monopoly of education over Germany in exchange for the dissolution of the Catholic Center Party to give the Nazis a clear runway, and they also celebrated Hitler's birthday from the pulpit until he died.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that the current Catholic Church is basically just, as far as
the current Catholic
power,
Church,
do they have any power? Do they have any political power at all? I know that they did for most of time, like most of recent history. Do you think that they still do? I don't really know on this, and
not really. I don't think so. I think the Catholic Church, their power kind of now is similar to like the British monarchy's power.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too.
It's a sort of like soft power that, when you're not front and center, right? When you're not going on crusades, right? When you're not like blaming Jewish people for the murder of your God, right? When you take a back seat, you're allowed to like retain your power, right? The power of the British monarchy right now is the fact that they don't have any power, right? Like people are cool with them being there because they're not doing anything insane, right? So it's kind of the fact that, all right, just stick to the shadows, don't kind of like try and manipulate things the way you did in the past, and
they're like mascots.
You can stay. Yeah, exactly.
Pretty much like Matt. They're like, yeah, this is like we represent the team here, but we're not actually doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. But yeah, no, I think that was a solid debate.
I like that one. I like that one a lot. Coming up in the future, we may have some guest appearances coming up. Maybe getting on some topics like environmentalism, sports gambling, maybe. So stick around. Maybe you'll find out something cool next time as well. Thanks, everyone.